Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you my standard review of the Voigtlander 110mm F2.5 macro lens. This is also designated as APO-Lanthar. APO refers to the fact that it's apochromatic, and Lanthar refers to the naming of one of their optical designs that they employ in this. And there's at least 2 or 3 other lenses that have a similar designation. And this is a really unique lens that I was excited to see announced, mostly because I have reviewed in the past the 65mm f2 APO-Lanthar lens and loved it. I've owned it for 3 years or so, and I found it to be an extremely useful lens. And so I was intrigued by the fact that unlike the 65mm, which is only a 1:2 or half size macro, the 110mm is a full 1:1 macro, and should deliver a lot of the similar properties to that lens, which is really fantastic. Now, if you want all the details, particularly the nitty-gritty when it comes to the optical performance, I'm going to recommend that you take a look at the definitive review, where I take a deeper dive into actual performance. And if you're really, I would strongly recommend, if you're considering purchasing the lens, that you spend the time invested in that and make sure that it's everything that you're looking for. Today, we're going to give you a quicker overview type review looking at the various qualities. So first of all, when we take a look at the build and the handling of the lens, this is a lens that is very much designed like classic Zeiss lenses. Now, what I mean by that is that a few years ago, Zeiss designated its Milvus series, and there was a number of the classic lenses that it kind of reskinned in a new Milvus build. Now, the classic Zeiss lenses, they utilized all metal and glass, basically. A metal knurled focus ring, a beautiful kind of satin finish on them. They're really aesthetically pleasing, great to handle, great to use. That's true of these Voigtlander lenses as well. This particular lens, it handles really beautifully. It has a unique density in terms of its weight and heft because it's all metal and glass. And compared to the 65mm, it is roughly similar in overall dimensions. It's almost identical in its diameter. It is a little bit longer, about 8 millimeters, and so, about not even half an inch, somewhere about 1/4 of an inch longer, and so very negligible in that regard. However, when it is zoomed all the way out, when I mean zoom, I'm talking about the focus action, the closer you go towards macro, the longer the barrel extends. And it extends significantly further than what the 65mm does. Again, because the 65mm is just a 1:2 macro, not a full 1:1. As a result of that, if there's any negative, is you have a really long focus throw as a part of that action. And so that's, the one kind of negative when it comes to that. The focus ring, though, is beautifully damped. Voigtlander, like Zeiss, knows how to do manual focus rings where they have that beautiful damping, that buttery smooth action. It's a joy to focus. It's just, in some situations, you have to focus more than what you might like because of that long focus throw. And so, but otherwise, the action there is beautiful. Now, while it does have electronic contacts, it does not have any kind of weather sealing or weather resistance, and it also has a fully manual aperture ring as well. Now, unlike some lenses that are manual focus and have a manual aperture ring, but don't have electronic contacts, you change the aperture from the aperture ring, but you cannot see within the camera what the aperture that it's set at actually is, nor is that information going to be applied to your photos and the EXIF data. So in this case, that doesn't happen. You do manually set the aperture. You can see aperture changing in the viewfinder or on screen, and that information is going to be buried in your files. And so as a part of that, my criticism of the aperture ring itself moves beautifully, has nice detents, and at 1/3 stops, which I prefer, gives you a little bit more finite control. But what I don't like the fact is that the aperture ring is actually recessed near the barrel. And I find that in real world shooting, particularly when my eye's up against the viewfinder, I don't find it all that easy to find it in a tactile kind of sense. It's not as ergonomic as the 65mm that has a more prominent aperture ring that is actually set out rather than in, and it's near the front of the barrel, easier to find by feel. And so that's one minor criticism that I offer up there. Beyond that, however, everything there is beautifully made. As noted, the focus action is beautifully precise, and if you're in shooting like portraits, it's not a hard lens to use because you have enough focus throw there, but you don't have to do a lot of focus. It's really in the middle of the range. If you're going down to macro, there's a lot of action there, but you're going to get to it and then make finite adjustments. But in that middle range, if you're half a meter, a foot to a couple of feet out, if you're at either one of those extremes, you have to do a fair bit of focus, a number of rotations to get to that point. And so for that reason, I don't think it is a good choice for video if you're wanting to do focus pulls. The focus throw is just too long to do in many situations for that. Now, I'm actually filming on it at the moment, and my experience with the 65mm and with this lens is that because it's optically fantastic, the footage looks beautiful. I would say I've probably had more just comments, people saying, what are you filming on, when I've used the Voigtlander 65mm than probably any other lens. And I would say that that's true of the quality of the footage you're going to get out of this lens. However, the nature of it means that it's not necessarily a great video lens. Also, the longer focal length makes it more inflexible. It's surprisingly how far, give you an example, for this particular episode right now, I have to set the camera about 6 meters away, 18 feet or so, 18 to 20 feet to allow even for this framing right here. So it's a little bit long in a lot of circumstances. I think the 65mm is the more flexible focal length, and even that, I don't reach for it as often for video just because, it's a longer focus throw. And so, just kind of bear that in mind. So as far as the image quality goes, the apochromatic design means that the image quality is fairly close to perfection in a lot of ways. The chromatic aberrations, longitudinal chromatic aberrations, are almost completely banished by that optical design because it allows all the colors to be focused more equally than what a typical design does. It's a more expensive approach, but it does yield certain results. And so as a byproduct of that, you're not going to have to deal with chromatic aberrations in any of your images, which means that you end up with a higher levels of contrast and micro contrast in many situations. As a result, that, and I love Voigtlander color. It is very similar to Zeiss in that it has a richness and a quality, and particularly in an apochromatic lens. By the way, that's what all of the Zeiss Otis lenses are. So I mean, there's a quality that's there to that, and it gives you really amazing punch to your images, and I think a nice three-dimensional quality to them. So all of that is really good. There is a tiny bit of pincushion distortion, not hardly detectable. There is some vignette. Fortunately, there is a profile both in camera for JPEGs and probably in most editing software, certainly in Lightroom, ACR, there is correction data that's there, and it corrects quite easily. The vignette is linear, and so for some portrait situations, it might be better to leave it unchecked. And a little bit of pincushion distortion is actually flattering for portrait work. So, there may be situations where you want it to leave it uncorrected, and you will like the results better there. As far as the sharpness compared to the 65mm, in the center of the frame, it's just as good, if not better. At the mid frame and the edges, the 65mm is noticeably better, at least in the copies that I compared. And so it's not till about F4 or so that the 110mm takes that leap to where it is astoundingly good in the corners. From F2.5 through F2.8, F3.5, it's good. It's not exceptional in the way that the 65mm is. The 65mm is right up there as one of the best lenses that I've tested. And so the 110mm is not quite to that level across the frame at wider apertures. Stop down, amazingly sharp, amazingly good. And if you're not comparing it side by side, real world results, it's super crisp, delivers really great results. Flare resistance is okay. It's got a somewhat weird hood design. And the hood design means that there's probably gonna be a lot of situations where you don't have the hood along, for the reason that you have to screw the lens hood in, and so it's threaded in, and it doesn't reverse for storage. Furthermore, it gives you a different filter thread up front without the lens hood attached. It's a 58mm filter thread. With the lens hood attached, it's a 67mm filter thread, and there's a secondary lens cap that comes with it. You actually get 2 lens caps in the box with the lens. So as I said, kind of a weird configuration. If you're looking right into the source of light, the lens hood doesn't make any difference. Where you will see a bit of a difference is if in the kind of the corner shots where maybe the light source, the sun, is right out of frame, and it might help you with a little bit of flaring and ghosting. Then the lens isn't bad in those situations either way. It's going to be a little bit better with the lens hood attached in those type situations. So overall, it's not perfect, it's not exceptional, it's not bad either. And I've seen a lot of telephoto lenses with wide apertures that have definitely more veiling and more ghosting effects. And so I give it kind of a mid-grade when it comes to that. Overall, the image quality is beautiful. The bokeh quality, often with apochromatic lenses, my experience is that the bokeh is not quite as soft because it has such amazing contrast, such great correction of aberrations, that the bokeh doesn't tend to be as soft. And in this case, I think that's true, though not to a pronounced degree. I think the bokeh quality is still pretty good. One thing, if you're really into kind of bokeh balls, the circular highlights, Voigtlander, much like Zeiss, does not curve their aperture blades. The aperture blades are straight. So when you start to stop the lens down, you quickly start to see the shape of the aperture blades. In this case, it is 10 aperture blades, so I think that's a hexagonal shape that you get. And so at least more blades means it is rounder, but you won't see a round shape. You'll see, you know, not a stop sign effect. It's not eight-sided, it's 10-sided, but you get my drift as to the effect of that. And so that might be one area that leaves you wanting a little bit. So at the end of the day, this lens, I think, is a relative bargain. It's not cheap in an absolute sense. It's going to cost you near $1,000 in the US market. However, this is a lens that delivers performance, and it's the design that I think is very comparable to a lens and actually has less chromatic aberration than, say, the Zeiss macroplanar 100mm F2 lens. And so it's giving you more performance, and it's about half the price. The macroplanar is going to run you many hundreds of dollars more for that. And so it's a relative value. It's reasonably compact for travel as long as you don't have that lens hood attached. And in many ways, I think it's one of the more unique lenses that you can purchase on the Sony platform and really delivers some incredible results. If you want more information, watch the definitive review, or you can read my text review, and I'll dive deeper into it as a part of that. There's also linkage in the description to not only to that text review, but to an image gallery if you want to go check out photos in detail. There's also buying links if you'd like to purchase one for yourself. Also linkage to follow me on social media, sign up for my newsletter, become a patron, and of course, if you haven't already, click that subscribe button right here on YouTube. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.